every siege operator ranked in their most overpowered state. This idea was given to me by Crimson, who commented this on my Siege Iceberg video, which you should check out if you haven't seen it already. But let's jump right into the tier list. I'll be ranking ops based on how strong their best version was or is, and I'll make it interesting. I'll include test server versions too. I'm just gonna go in the order they are laid out on the website to make things easier. So starting us off, we have Aami. Aami is an easy S tier, with her barricades being bulletproof. The angles you could create and basically be untouchable if you had any explosive defense were insane. Next up is Brava, who I'm going to stick in B tier. Her drones are great if you get full value out of them, stealing a few cameras or some Kapkan traps, but those drones can be taken out very easily. However, she has a great kit, so you're not completely useless once her drones are gone. Up next we got Deimos, which is a tricky one, but I think I'm going to stick him in B tier, but a high B tier. Deimos is really good in the right hands at roam clearing or applying pressure with a well-coordinated team, but being limited to his pistol, even though it's a really good pistol, and also getting pinged while you track someone, is why he isn't higher for me. Fenrir. There's a reason he still gets banned pretty frequently today. At his best, which was pretty recently, he's for sure S tier. 5 gas traps and they're bulletproof when inactive made him super strong, since you just had to wait for the sound of the gas to swing for a free pick. And being able to switch which trap you want on and off at the push of a button is another reason why he's S tier. Next up is Grim, who has risen in the rankings after all his buffs. He's currently in his best state now, and I think he's a high A tier. Those bees can get people moving, and if a defender gets caught in those bees, they are constantly live pinged. He's really good for pre and post plant, and also a solid flank watch too. The reason he's not S tier though is because getting caught with the launcher out means it's over for you, and sometimes the bees don't always bounce the way you want them to. Osa. Osa is a very solid op who I think belongs in A tier. She's one of the strongest ops for post plant, or she can cut off certain spots just by sitting there behind the shield, leaving defenders stuck like Chuck. But if they have an impact or a C4, that can be a problem, and she's also not fully covered while holding the shield. Next up is Ram. I'm gonna stick Ram in B tier. She was at her best on the test server with 4 drones and the pre-nerfed R4C. Her vertical control is really good, and having the R4C is great, but her downsides are how loud her boogie drone is, and sometimes getting rid of the entire floor can do more harm than good. Thunderbird. Thunderbird was at her best when she could constantly overheal, having the pre-nerf spear and before they changed what the health bar looked like. What I mean by that is that the old health bar used to show everyone having 100 health no matter the armor. This was changed to a bar, which is what we currently have, that shows what armor you are. When they changed this, it was an indirect nerf to Thunderbird, since the healing stations would always heal the same amount no matter the armor. But I don't want to get too far off topic, so I'd stick Thunderbird at her best at an A tier. Up next is Flores, who really hasn't changed at all since his release. I'd say he's a solid A tier. His drones are great for breaking clustered up utility from a safe distance, or even stopping a bandit from tricking. However, the drones can be taken out pretty easily, but he still has a good kit even when his drones are out of commission, which is why I think he belongs in A. Next is Aruni, and I'm thinking at her best, she belongs in B tier. I'd say she was at her best when she was a 2-speed. Her gates are useful and require a piece of attacker utility to be burnt, which can be a huge difference in a round. And of course, being able to punch out a whole wall is nice too. Resetting the gates is a nice feature, but manually having to do it is kind of annoying. Sometimes it's in a spot where it's just annoying or awkward to hit. And once the gate is down, attackers usually don't have to worry too much since it takes a while to reset. But she does have a solid kit, so that's why I said a high B tier. Zero. Zero is one of the most underrated ops, so I think at his best belongs in A tier. I'd say he's currently at his best. Zero is one of the best solo queue ops since you have 4 cameras that can zap certain utility, or you can use them to check out a room and see if it's clear, as well as a hard breach to help you get to where you need to go. He's got one of the best primaries in the game and just an overall well-rounded op. Up next is Ace. Ace at his best belongs in S tier. His best was when he first came out, when his Selma charge just opened up 3 holes instead of 2, and they deployed a bit faster. Ace was able to make a hole in the wall big enough that you could just walk right through. And I'm pretty sure that AK-12 was better at the time too. Melusi, another easy S tier at her best. When she first came out, she was a 3-speed, had a nitro cell, had the T5 SMG, which is Orcs and Legion's SMG. Her Banshee was bulletproof, so you had to either knife it or hit it with an explosive, and it had an insanely wide radius. Next up is Oryx. At his best, I think he's in B tier. His best was when he had the 1.5 and when he can jump up rooftop hatches, which never made it past the test server. He's a solid solid roamer and has always been a great counter to shields, and being able to open up entire walls is great too. However, taking damage from running through the walls isn't ideal. Iana is another great solo queue op, and I'd say at her best, she was an A tier. Her best was probably during the 1.5 meta when she had her frags, and when the G36 was a laser. She basically has unlimited drones with her clone, and it was just good for baiting people too. And of course, she has the best elite skin in the game. Next is Wumai, and I think at his best, he belongs in A tier, which is when he had the 1.5 on his MP5K and a deployable shield. With this kit, you could really lock down an area. Most commonly was on Cafe and Christmas next to bathroom. Callie at her best is probably a C tier. I know there are some crazy Callie players out there, but objectively she's just not that great. But she's for sure a fun op to play. Amaru. At her best, I think she belongs in D tier. Well, yeah, she's another op that's fun to play, but objectively, she's just not that good. 90% of the time, when you see someone pick Amaru, they just fly in without droning, and they're dead meat James 30 seconds into the round. Next is Goyo, and he definitely belongs in S tier at his best. Some of the new players might not know this, but Goyo originally had his canisters attached to deployable shields. He had 3 of them, so he could really lock down an area, although the fire didn't last nearly as long as it does now. But I think having those shields just automatically makes him an S tier. Next up is Nokk, which is an interesting one. At her best, I'd say she's an A tier. The reason I'm putting her so high is because of the buff that never made it past the test server, where she could bypass pretty much any electronic-based gadget, like Malusi's Banshee, Capcan traps, prox alarms, and metal detectors. Paired with the silent step, she'd be an insanely good entry fragger. Nokk did get buffed pretty recently, but I still think this would be stronger. Warden. At his best, I'm putting him in C tier. His best was when he had the 1.5, obviously, since no one would ever use him for his ability. He is a solid counter to the Smoking Plant and Ying players, but he's just very situational, and plus all the Warden mains would just never reinforce anything. Next is Mozzie. At his best is with the pre-nerf Rooney with a 1.5, and I think I'll stick him in mid B tier. His gadget hasn't changed at all since release, and it's pretty solid. Stealing drones is great, but you're not always guaranteed one. Gridlock. In my opinion, Gridlock is one of the most underrated ops that I'm gonna stick in high B tier. I'd say she was at her best when she got frags right before they got nerfed. She's got a great kit, and those tracks can be really annoying to deal with post-plant. Up next is Nomad, and I'm gonna stick her in S tier. The reason I'm doing this is because at her best was when she first came out on the test server. Her air jabs would go off instantly if you shot one at a defender, giving you a free kill pretty much every time. Thankfully, this did not make it past the test server. She also has a really good kit with a secondary that was insane at the time too. Cade has always been a great operator ever since his release, so at his best, he's an easy S tier. I'd say he was at his best when he had the 1.5, when Thatcher was always banned, and when there were no pocket EMPs. If you put that electrical in a spot where it can't be reached, it can really be a hassle to deal with. Up next is Clash. Now I could rank Clash when that glitch was in the game where you could shoot through the shield, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to count any glitches in this tier list, so I think Clash belongs in D tier at her best, which I think is right before the pocket EMPs got added. I just don't think she's that great. Yeah, she can be annoying to deal with, but if you leave her till last, you can just jump her. Maverick has always been great. He's another easy S tier at best. He hasn't really changed too much, but when he first came out, his blowtorch was much more quiet, leading to some sneaky picks through the cracks of time on unsuspecting defenders. And he used to have pre-nerf frags, which basically made him a one-man army. Next up is Maestro, and I think at his best, he belongs in S tier, but a low S tier. His best was when he first came out, when he had an ACOG, and when the hipfire was insane on his LMG. His cameras couldn't be cracked at the time, and I'm pretty sure he had a deployable shield. There was a lot less stuff that could destroy his evil eye, so his cameras had a much higher chance of surviving the round. Up next is Alibi, who I'm gonna throw in like lower B tier at her best. I'd say she was at her best with her pre-nerfed SMG when it had 0 recoil. Her decoys really haven't changed at all, and they've always been solid for getting a bit of info on where an enemy is. Lion. Yeah, everyone knows where Lion at his best belongs. Right at the top of S tier. Given the attacker's wall hacks at the push of a button if a defender moved was insane. I have no clue what Ubisoft was thinking, releasing Lion in the state that he was. Finka at her best probably belongs in S tier. She was at her best during the LMG meta, and they'd also just added where you could keep your health after she used her boost, the newly added self-revive, and of course being able to revive all your teammates. Vigil. This is an interesting one because of a test build, so I'm gonna stick him in A tier. I feel that Vigil's always been a solid A tier, but I put him up a a little bit higher because of this. There was a test build where Vigil had the 1.5 for like 20 minutes that Coconut Bra and Bolo played, and that's when he was at his best. But also being able to hide from drones and just waste attackers' time has always been great. Up next is Dokkaebi, and I think she belongs in S tier, but like a lower S tier. She was at her best when she had frags and her calls weren't on a cooldown. She's really good for roam clearing, and being able to steal defenders' cameras is a very strong ability. She's got a great kit, and she's also a certified best. Zofia. This is a prime time to use the saying, "Oh, how the mighty have fallen." Zofia at her best was an easy S tier. When she first came out, she had 4 stunts and 2 impacts in her launcher, an insane AR and LMG, and of course, the notorious withstand, where Zofia could just self-revive out of sheer willpower. Ella is another easy S tier at her best, which was when she first dropped. She had 50 rounds in her Scorpion with basically no recoil, a crazy shotgun, 4 concussion mines, and a bonus 5th one if you went down, and impact grenades were a shield. Her and Zofia both recovered faster from their concussion effect. The Polish sisters used to absolutely dominate ranked games. Up next is Ying. I'm gonna say at her best, she's in S tier. Her best was when they gave her 4 Candelas, smokes, and buffed her LMG. The reason I'm not saying now is because of pre-buffed Warden, back when it took a lot longer for his glasses to recharge. She still is really good right now, especially for a classic smoke and plant when they aren't ready for it. Next up is Lesion, who I think at any point in time is an S tier. Even at his worst, he's still an S tier. His best though was probably when he first came out. When his goo mines were invisible, you could see where the goo was placed no matter where you were on the map. He had impacts, the goo mines did an automatic 10 damage when you stepped in them, and they did 8 damage per tick. When I don't know who to pick in rank, usually Lesion is my go-to operator. Mira at her best is another easy S tier, and that was any time before you could crack the glass on the Mira window. If you saw a Mira window, your best option was just to go a different way, since you probably weren't winning that gunfight. You could even just set up a window for info or as a deterrent. The Vector is really good with one of the fastest fire rates in the game. The secondary shotgun is great for making holes in the wall, and the C4 is always great to have for denying plant. Jackal. No surprise he belongs in S tier. It's hard to say when he was at his best, but it's either when he first came out or when he got a mini rework. But I'd say it was before pick and ban was introduced. Being able to get an exact ping on an enemy is very strong and always will be strong. Plus, Jackal has always had a great kit. Next up is Hibana. I think her best is right now, or maybe during the 1.5 meta. But either way, she belongs in A tier. Adding the ability to be able to change her pellets from 6 to 4 or 2 was a massive upgrade. She's great for creating lines of sight or for getting hatches open. And she has a solid kit. Her downside is that she's just not better than Ace or Thermite when it comes to getting walls open. Echo. I'm thinking he belongs in S tier at his best. I'm pretty sure he was at his best when he was given a second yokai drone. They could still go invisible, he had an ACOG, and his drones made your screen wobble until you stopped moving. His drones have always been great for denying plant, but his only downside is how easily the drone could be destroyed once it was found. But he did have a solid kit to fall back on if they did get destroyed. Caviera. I hate to do this to Cav, but she belongs in C tier. Even at her best, when her pistol did 99 damage and had no drop off, it just took slight coordination to drone her out and it was over for her. Don't get me wrong, I think Cav is a lot of fun to play as, especially when you get an interrogation. She was for sure the most fun back when she first came out, but sadly, fun does not equal good. Up next is Capitao, and I think he belongs in B tier. He's either at his best now or during the 1.5 meta. Either way, it's been a while since he's changed. His smokes are good cover, or they can create some really good one-way angles. His fire is pretty situational, but it's definitely great for post-plant or getting someone to move. And he's also got a pretty solid kit, but overall, he's a situational operator. Blackbeard. Yeah, you already know he's going right in S tier. At his best when he first came out. Blackbeard was unstoppable with his old rifle shield. There was no winning a gunfight with Blackbeard on a window or a head glitch. Your only chance was with a well-placed C4, or if the Blackbeard just sucked and couldn't hit his shots. Valkyrie. No doubt she belongs in S tier. At her best was when she first came out, when she had 4 cameras and you could throw all of them outside. As an attacker, it was an absolute nightmare trying to find them without an IQ. And this was also back when you got 5 points per scan, so you're constantly getting red pinged. Next up is Buck. Another S tier who was at his best when he had his frags and when his DMR had no fire cap, meaning you could basically shoot as fast as you click. He's a better Sledge. He gets the walls and floors open from a safe distance, and he's got a great AR, especially after they changed that recoil. Frost. Frost has always been a solid go-to option, and I think I'll stick her in B tier at her best. Her best was when she had the 1.5, you couldn't self-revive out of a frost mat, and she had her secondary shotgun. The reason I think she belongs in B tier is because while her primary has no recoil, it has a slow fire rate. The welcome mats can be spotted with a few seconds of droning, and can be taken out with with just a pre-fire when you hop in the window. Next is Mute, and I think at his best, he belongs in S tier. He was at his best when he finally got the SMG-11, his jammer radius was a lot bigger, and he was a 2-speed. Mute counters so many operators, and he's always been great at denying drones. There was even a point when his jammer was so strong, he could deny hatches from being opened. Up next is Sledge, and at his best, I'm gonna stick him in high A tier. He's not quite S tier at his best, but he's very close. Back when he was a 2-speed, you could cook nades, and he had the SMG-11 as a secondary, was when he was at his best. The reason I'm not sticking him in S tier is because you've always had to get up close and personal with the sledgehammer to use it. Smoke. Smoke has been a really solid plant and entry denial op for a long time. At his best, I'm gonna stick him in low S tier. He was at his best when Smoke could clip through walls. I'm not gonna count it as a glitch since it was used in Pro League and it wasn't something that could get you banned. He's also always had a very solid kit with the Shoddy and SMG-11 combo. Next is Thatcher, and he's another easy S tier at his best. He was at his best when he was a 2-speed, and his EMPs would break anything in the blast radius. This made it nearly impossible for Bandit to trick, or just saved you the time and trouble of clearing doors for Capcan traps. Paired with a very solid kit is why he was one of the best. Ash. Ash is a tricky one, but I want to say at her best, she's A tier. Her best was before the 1.5 meta, when she had her ACOG on the pre-nerfed R4C. Her breaching rounds are always reliable for either opening a soft wall or breaking utility. There was a very small period of time when she had 3 breaching rounds, but I think the pre-nerf R4C with ACOG was when she was better. Ash players haven't changed one bit. In year 9, you still very frequently get Ash players sprinting in somewhere on the map. Next is Castle, who I like to call Rassel. I'm gonna stick him in A tier. Castle has risen in my favorites in the past few years, and I think he's at his best currently. He's got 4 barricades, a super shorty, and prox alarms. He's just really good at wasting time. I know it's not the best SMG, but I really do like using his UMP with ACOG. It's really easy to use. One of his big downsides though is how long it can take to set everything up. Next is Pulse, and at his best, I'm putting him in S tier. Now you're probably wondering what version of Pulse is the best and belongs in S tier. It's the closed alpha version of him. Now I know there's going to be someone that says, well, that doesn't count, it's not the full game. Well, I don't really care. If I'm counting the test servers, I'm counting the alpha and beta as well. His heartbeat sensor would give a constant location of the enemy and exact distance. It was also blue, which is kind of cool. Obviously, being able to see exactly where the enemies are at all times is insanely strong, so that's why he's S tier. Thermite, one of the few operators that hasn't really changed at all throughout the years. I'm going to stick him in A tier at his best, which is when he had frags all the way back when the game first came out. He's got a great kit, and he's just really reliable for making a big hole. Paired with Thatcher back in the day, no wall stood a chance. But even today, he's still a great op to have on your team. Montaña, I'm going to stick him in A tier at his best. I can't really decide if his best is currently with the shield meta, or if it was when he could hip fire across the map with his revolver. Either way, as a defender, he's always been annoying to deal with. He's great for a smoke and plant, or just causing pressure by pushing up with his extended shield. Next is Twitch, and I think I'll stick her in A tier at her best. This is another tricky one since she's had so many changes over the years, but I'm gonna say at her best was probably when she had the 1.5, her drone could jump, and she had the vertical grip. It was between that or when her drone had 15 shocks that did 10 damage each, which could be used during the prep phase to take someone out. Either way, 90% of the people that pick Twitch is for the F2 anyway, so you can honestly say whenever the F2 had a vertical grip. Next up is Doc, and I think I'm going to stick him in A tier at his best, which is currently. Doc can currently full heal any operator from 1 health all the way back up to full health with just 1 stim, and he's also got the bailiff, a bulletproof, as well as the MP5 with an ACOG. The reason he's not S tier is because you still have to be in the line of sight for Doc to hit you with his stim, so it's not always guaranteed. Rook, another A tier at his best, which is also currently. Rook has impacts and the MP5 with ACOG, as well as his armor plates giving everyone self-revive, which is kinda crazy. He's always a solid choice if you really don't know who to pick and want to help your team out. Jaeger. I'm gonna stick Jaeger in S tier at his best. When he had his ACOG, and when his ADSs could stop up to 3 or 2 grenades per device, but I'm not 100% sure what number it was. Regardless, that was when Jaeger was a 3-speed and his gun was the best on defense. Next up is Bandit, and this is another tricky one, but I'm gonna say he's an A tier at his best, which is currently, only because of how much easier it's become to Bandit trick. It's really hard to say if Bandit was that much better with an ACOG and when he had 3 barbed wire, but I think regardless, I'd still stick him in A tier. That MP5 and Nitro Cell can really put in some work, but when it comes to wall denial, either old Thatcher or Maverick can make quick work of those batteries. Blitz, one of the most annoying operators of all time. At his best, I'll stick him in high S tier. His best was during the test server when he got turned into Turbo Blitz. He was supposed to be a 2-speed, but he was slightly faster, nearly a 3-speed, and his pistol had no recoil. He could ADS pretty fast. He had 5 flashes with no cooldown between uses, and his melee was a one-hit kill. This is also when Lion and Finka just came out, so defense was an absolute nightmare. Next is IQ, and I'm gonna stick her in C tier. I think at her best could be now, or it could be during the 1.5 meta, but her gadget really isn't anything special. It's pretty situational, and there's just usually someone better that can be picked. She's good for hunting down a Vigil or a Pulse, but most people just pick her for her primaries, and I don't think that's enough to push her up into B tier. I also don't want to count when her sensor could see through smoke, because that was technically a glitch. Next is Fuse, and in my opinion, one of the most overhated ops. At his best, I'll stick him in B tier, which is when he got his 4th cluster charge, so you could either say now or during the 1.5 meta. He's always been really good at clearing out utility, as well as potentially getting a free pick for either yourself or your teammate, since he gets people to move around. He's also got a great kit, with the Hard Breach, the AK-12, or the LMG. His downside is though, when placing that cluster charge, you are pretty exposed for either a roamer to get you or a C4 to hit you. Up next is Glaz, or who I like to call G-Laz. At his best, I'll stick him in S tier. Glaz was at his best when he first got his thermal scope upgrade. You didn't need to wait for it to charge up. As soon as you ADS'd, you could see the defenders glowing bright yellow, even through smoke. His DMR is also like a 2 to 3 shot kill on most operators with no recoil at all. The Lord Tachanka. I'm gonna stick him in B tier at his best, which is currently or during the 1.5 meta. I think he's pretty underrated. He's got good plant and entry denial, as well as a pretty solid kit. His LMG, even though sadly is no longer mounted, it's still loaded and is great for taking out walls. However, his fire doesn't always go where you want it to, and sometimes people can just sprint through the fire and kill you when you have your grenade launcher out. Capcan. I'm gonna stick him in A tier, and I'd say at his best is where he is currently. It was a toss-up between now and back when he could one-shot anyone with his trap. The reason I don't think the old version of Capcan is the best is because he was a 1-speed and you could see the lasers on his traps. With current Capcan, you can put an entire nuke on a door if you want to, and you can't see any of the lasers. His downside is his traps can be destroyed pretty easily and found out with a little bit of droning. Next is Sense, who's at their best currently and belongs in C tier. Sense is very situational, and those ROUs have an unpredictable path. Good for a smoke and plant though, but sometimes those walls can hurt more than they help. Sense is a decent kit at least, especially after the AR got a buff, and being a 3-speed is always nice, but not enough to sneak into B tier. Striker and Sentry. I'm gonna do them together since they're basically the same operator but for each side. I'm gonna stick them both in B tier. Striker and Sentry are brand new and are both currently at their best. Both have a solid kit, and being able to choose 2 of any secondary gadget is actually pretty useful and can let you be a one-man army. Next is the newest operator, Scopos, and I'm gonna stick her in A tier. Her best is obviously this current season since she just released. Being able to rotate back on the site instantly if things are getting too crazy for the anchors is the best. It's also nice to be able to use the other robot as a camera to see if it's clear to switch. Having 2 separate health bars for each robot is also really useful. You almost have 2 lives. The new AR is really good and has no recoil, and having impacts is great to help with roaming. The reason she's not S tier is because if the inactive robot gets destroyed, which isn't too hard to do, you're now stuck like Chuck and you have to run back to site, which could take too long. Solace. Solace at her best is another S tier. She was at her best when she first came out, being able to identify any gadget including the diffuser, so she was really good for plant denial, especially when she had her impacts. Her only counter was to either plant on top of something or hunt her down, which would usually waste so much time. Next is Thorn, and I'm gonna stick her in C tier. I would say she was at her best when she first came out, since her SMG had 0 recoil. Her Razor Bloom really hasn't changed at all. It can get random kills, especially if it's paired with one of Legion's goo mines, but usually people just run away. Maybe they should give her a 4th Razor Bloom. I don't know if that would make her better, but it would at least be something. Tubarao. I think Tubarao is a sneaky S tier. His best was when he first came out, having 4 freeze canisters. With those 4 freeze canisters, he could delay the wall getting open for a long time. He's also a good roamer, being able to counter Dokkaebi from calling him, as well as being a 3-speed with a DMR. Last but certainly not least is Old Recruit. I'm gonna stick him in B tier at his best, which is when he can run a shield or the GSG-9 shotty on attack for Recruit Rush, or for shield Team 6. On defense he wasn't the best though, since he only had 1 reinforcement, but having access to nearly every weapon on defense was awesome. And that's it. Every single operator ranked in the most overpowered or best state from launch until now. Here's a final look at the completed list. Let me know if you agree or disagree with the rankings in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like because it really helps me out a lot. This video is a lot of fun to make, so if you have any ideas of your own, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll check them out, and maybe I'll turn it into a video. I try my best to read all my comments. Sorry this video took so long to get out. Life got in the way and, you know, places to go, people to see. But hopefully I'll have a Dead by Daylight video out real soon, and then we'll be back to Siege. Alright, that's about all I have to say, so hopefully I see you in the next video.